Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ Envy, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the Guy. We are the Breakfast Club, and we have a special guest with us today.
She got the flyest name in the univerus.
That's right, MiAngel Cody.
MiAngel.
That's right.
That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, MiAngel.
What was it? I mean, I know it's
You had a
self-explanatory.
purpose.
Yes, but what was the meaning?
Right. I was the first. I was the firstborn. So my mother was like, it's either going to be Alicia or MiAngel. And so she picked MiAngel. So I kind of grew into it. You know, I think your name is what you grow into. It's a declaration.
Did you ever think it was too big for you?
No.
Okay.
I didn't actually. It's a mandate, you know. I think that
Definitely.
it sets expectations with my clients for sure.
Now, when we looked you up, it says you pick locks to prison cages.
I do.
You get people out. So explain what you do.
So I'm a federal criminal defense lawyer. I only represent men and women who are serving life in prison for drugs.
Wow.
So, you know, everybody who's been thrown away under the failed drug war, they're still there and they're still needing lawyers to help get them out. So my team, I lead a team of women. We're 100% woman-powered, Black woman-led law firm that goes in. We're like the SEAL team that goes in and gets people out of prison who have been buried alive.
Is it easier now since they're legalizing marijuana at all, or is it more difficult? Is it?
You know, no.
Wow.
Because I think they're legalizing marijuana, but in a racially disparate way, right? And so some people it's legal to grow, sell marijuana, and for some people it's still a basis to pull you over, to stop you and search your car. So I think the real question is legalization full blown, or is it for some people, right? Is that also just another flag of discrimination?
Yeah, I think the biggest form of hypocrisy is legalizing marijuana recreationally and for medicinal purposes, but keeping people who got locked up for marijuana still in jail.
Right.
Like their records should be expunged. They should be released immediately.
Absolutely. Because what's happening is people are locked up for marijuana. So the state is making money off of having them locked up. Incarceration is private prisons are a huge business. And then the state is making money off of taxing marijuana, dispensaries, right? And so it's like you want to have it both ways.
That's right.
Now, MiAngel, I'm so happy you're here because I do want to start with the war on drugs, right? Because you describe it so well, and you do have a documentary, The Third Strike. So let's talk about the war on drugs and how that affected us, and then we can talk about the 3 strikes.
Yeah, so the war on drugs, we are in one of the third iterations of the war on drugs, right? That started in 1986, and it was because of the drug overdose of Len Bias, right? So he was first round, second draft pick in 1986. That night died of a cocaine overdose. Congress then rushed and passed the 1986 Controlled Substances Act, right? That implemented all of these very, very high mandatory minimum penalties, specifically about crack, that targeted the Black community and locked up people. And the way it was packaged and sold is, we're doing this to help you all, to stop this epidemic. And I think one thing we've learned since the pandemic is America is not the best at responding to a public health crisis.
That's right.
And we've known that from the Black community's perspective for decades at least, right? And so the war on drugs was packaged and sold to us as a solution to a public health epidemic. But what essentially happened is it created a whole other epidemic of mass incarceration.
That's right. And then there was the 88 crack laws.
Right. Then there was the 88 crack laws. Then there was the abolition of federal parole, right? So you have mandatory minimums that are put in place, and you abolish parole. So a lot of people don't know in the federal system, when a judge looks at you and says you are going to receive a life sentence, that means you are going to die in prison. There's no parole board in the federal system. And so that's why, I represent people who literally have been thrown away because they have no possibility of parole.
How hard was it for you to vote for somebody like Joe Biden because he was the architect of all of those tough on crime legislations, 86 mandatory minimum sentencing, 88 crack laws, 94 crime bill?
It's hard for me to vote for anyone, in the current system, because I think until I hear someone truly talking about mass incarceration abolition, then I'm not impressed. But I understand what I have to do in order to stop the, bloodshed in the community. But it's difficult, you know, and I think, one of the problems that I see is this conversation about criminal justice reform, and so as a lawyer, I'm like, that's fine. That's sort of the diluted solution. And I think we've all sort of rallied around this idea that we want criminal justice reform and we want prison reform. But, if this were 150 years ago, would we be saying we want slavery reform?
Ooh.
Or would we be saying we want segregation reform?
Ooh.
Or Jim Crow reform?
Yeah.
And so at what point did we start settling for reform?
Instead of abolishing the whole system. Yeah,
like, why would we reform mass incarceration? Why not abolish it? That's the problem. And so I think the difficulty for me is not only who I'm voting for, but the way in which the public consciousness about the solution is being diluted.
So what do you think about the prison system? What would you do to change it, to make it, I guess, fair, if there would be a fair?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is the prison system is built on a number of lies, myths, right? First myth is that only criminals are in prison, right? And we know that you can go to prison for, not getting your GED if you're on parole, or being on the porch with another felon, right? And so I think we have to first abolish the myth that people who are in prison committed some crime, because that's not necessarily the case. I think we also have to attack the myth that people being in prison makes us safer. None of my guys who've gotten out and we've walked off life sentences were a danger to the community, right? And so I think part of the propaganda that the machine is spinning out is that you're safer with this black man in prison, right? And none of us who actually are in the culture would believe that, And so I think attacking some of those myths are very, very important.
I want you to know, man, if I was locked up, because I feel like I am, because I'm behind the wall, if you came, I would think I'm getting out.
Yeah?
Yes, because
I'm getting you out.
Yes, my angel, and you come with a presence. Like I think I got a chance to come home.
I'm getting you out.
Word.
Yeah.
MiAngel, I want to go back to what you were just saying, though, because it's interesting when you were talking about people who are in prison aren't necessarily dangerous. And in the documentary, you talk about the confidential informants actually being more dangerous than the people who are being released. So can you expand on that and explain how that works?
Yeah, so there's kind of like a recipe for getting a life sentence in federal drug cases. And part of that is, obviously if you're black or brown or poor, then you're at a disadvantage. But then there's something called a cooperation coupon, right? And so, Charlamagne, let's say that you get caught selling drugs. And you have 2 priors, maybe for marijuana in the 90s.
That is true.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So you got some priors, right? Get caught up in a ring. You're with DJ Envy, y'all, in a drug ring.
I'm telling.
But hey, this is perfect typecasting that you're doing right now.
Exactly.
You have no idea how I'll point you
imitates life. Or life imitates art.
Okay.
So, all right. So you got these 2 priors, right? You walk into federal court, you get busted. The prosecutor can slam down on the desk this piece of paper called a 3 strikes enhancement. That means that if you're convicted, you're facing a mandatory life sentence without parole, right? And I'm giving you the old law. So 2 ways to get out of that, right? The prosecutor's going to say, if you cooperate, bring me somebody else, bring me another case, then I'll withdraw the 3 strikes enhancement from your case, right? So that's why we see a lot of cooperators, right? Because judges can't go below a mandatory minimum unless the prosecutor takes that piece of paper off the table.
Wow.
Even if you're the judge's son, right? Can't go below it. Another way, so that's the cooperation coupon. Another way is you give up your right to trial. So maybe I'm your lawyer and I think the evidence is weak, right? Like the search warrant was bogus. There's something that's going on. I think the snitches are all liars. But you don't want to go to trial and risk losing and facing a mandatory life sentence, even though you're supposed to have a constitutional right to a trial. But the risk makes the offer too great to refuse, right? And so that's why a lot of people ask me, like, how are these guys getting life in prison? And the reality is that the prosecutor doesn't want to work, right? And so if you don't make them go to trial, they'll take this, boot essentially off of you. And if you cooperate, meaning you bring more cases. And that's how the machine is sort of cannibalizing, right? Because you bring us more people, we open more cases, we get more funding for more task forces, we all pay our mortgages, we go on these great vacations, and your lives are ruined, right? And so that's essentially how it works.
Now with the snitching part, I mean, I never understood how that works, right? Well, I mean, I know what snitching is, but
he's a liar.
No,
he's been an informant.
You know how it works, Envy.
No, because
You wearing a wire?
no, not today. But now let's say Charlamagne is facing life, right? And they say, hey, bring us a case, and we're not gonna give you life. 8 out of 10 people gonna snitch, right? Honestly. Now, Charlamagne gonna snitch on damn near anybody to get himself out. So how reliable is he as a witness now? Because now he gonna snitch on Dan and say Dan did some stuff.
That's a good question.
You know what I mean? So how reliable is he as a witness? Because that's what he's gonna do. He gonna say anything to get himself out.
Right. So, as a lawyer, I'm gonna attack you if I ever get you on the stand. But the problem with mandatory minimums is my clients don't want to risk that. You don't want to risk having a jury that doesn't look like you, that comes from the suburbs, that doesn't come from your community, that may not be able to tease out that Charlamagne's a liar, right? Like, you would know Charlamagne's a liar, but that woman who lives in the suburbs and takes her kids to soccer practice, she might really believe him. And so the conversation is like, do you really want to hang your hat and your entire life's freedom on that woman's verdict?
Now, question, with Charlamagne snitching, right? Does it matter if his snitching gets the guy convicted or not? So let's say Charlamagne gets on the stand and he snitches. He said, this guy did this, I seen it, this, that, and the other. Yeah. The guy doesn't get convicted. Now, does Charlamagne
He still gets his coupon.
So he still gets
he gets his cooperation
so he gets to
coupon.
snitch no matter what, if it's convicted or not.
Yes.
That's crazy.
And so what happens, I see in some of my cases, these snitches,
They gonna lie.
they lie. It's ghost dope, right? Like they're making up stuff. And so, but they get the coupon and then they get out and then they keep, committing more crime, which goes back to what I was saying about the myth that it's making the community safer. It's not about that.
How do you think things would change if nonviolent drug offenses were treated with rehabilitation rather than imprisonment?
I think that we would stop defunding our community if that happened. I think that part of what we've seen is just generations of defunding the community. And if we reinvested in mental health resources, drug treatment, reentry resources, then that would radically shift the way in which people are able to access their healthy potential, right? But, for most of the guys who I stand with, the federal prosecution of them is like the first time that the system ever really paid a lot of attention to them. It wasn't the education system. It wasn't the healthcare system. If they experienced trauma, there wasn't any mental health services. But, you get a drug case and the United States of America shows up to prosecute you.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
Can you talk about your own background and why this is important to you?
I think that's a good question, Angela. My father struggled with addiction and probably still does. I messaged him a couple weeks ago and was like, are you sober? And didn't get a response.
Wow.
So I think that this work is my way of forgiving myself, forgiving, my childhood, forgiving, the person who sold drugs to my father. And I think that sort of it's a very personal level of restorative justice that happens. And then we can talk about wider restorative justice. Like then we can talk about how do we create restorative justice in the community and envision that. So for me is that I'm also very competitive and, I just want it to be the greatest. Like I want the greatest numbers. I want to win the most cases. I want to set the most precedent. I want the podium to shake. And so that level of competition also fuels me. In
the case of your father, why did you feel like you needed to forgive yourself for his addiction?
I think it was more me feeling like I needed to forgive myself for believing for so long that he wasn't addicted, you know, and believing that there was some other excuse, there's some other reason, there's got to be, you know, and just kind of being like, dang, Angel, you didn't see that? You know, you didn't know?
And like he had his own traumas that he was dealing with. Right. He was self-medicating. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And just not seeing it. So.
And one thing we have to take into consideration too is when your father, you know, for people's fathers, because you have an attorney that works with you, and her father was in and out of jail, and she was embarrassed. Right. And sometimes you don't even understand how that affects a whole community and a whole family of having that patriarch gone, or your mom or whoever away from the family. And she's like, I used to try to hide that.
Exactly. Yeah, it's defunding, right? That's what's so interesting about the defund conversation. But it's like that person is gone, and then you feel that up with shame or resentment. And so I definitely think that the work that I'm doing is to repair families. I want to see fathers and mothers back in their families, grandparents, right? And so for a lot of my guys, they miss raising their kids. They've been locked up for 20 years. And so they're getting an opportunity to be in their grandchild's life.
Right. Yeah. Do you think we're getting close? I asked this question, but I kind of know the answer. Do you think we're getting closer to recognizing addiction as an illness rather than a crime? Because I feel like they're definitely doing that in the white communities with the opioid crisis. But as far as with black people and our addictions?
No, absolutely not. And I'm reporting live from the federal court podium. No, I don't think that judges are recognizing addiction as an illness when it is expressed in black people. I think that mental illness in itself is a privilege that oftentimes we do not get to enjoy in court. And as mitigating, as an explanation, not an excuse, but as an explanation for why we're standing in front of a judge. And repeatedly, I've seen where my clients who are white, I can present mental health, I can get my psychologist experts and present reports, and it's heard, and it factors into the calculation of how the judge is going to punish them, if at all. Or if the prosecutor is going to give them pretrial diversion and dismiss the case, right? But to say that this young black man experienced trauma and didn't have any counseling for it, and that's why he's standing before you, Your Honor, is it often doesn't, it's not heard in the same way. The potency somewhere between my lips and the judge's ears, something is lost.
And it's amazing, right? Because we are the community that's dealt with the most trauma.
Exactly.
We are the community that deals with so many different mental health issues that, don't get diagnosed. So when people say things, like somebody told me a quote the other day, they was like, stop being so forgiving to people because people know what the fuck they're doing. I'm like, no, they don't. They don't, because of the things that they've been through. They have no idea that they're reacting in this way, that they're projecting a lot of their own insecurities, their own hurt, their own pain. They have no idea.
Right. No, they might not have any idea. And I think that oftentimes courts have no idea how to handle people. So we turn people into numbers, right? You get, the first thing that happens to you when you're arrested is there's a number assigned to you. And then there's a case number assigned. And then we look at how many kilos or grams, and it just, the whole apparatus is operating by numbers. How many cases were closed? What was the sentence? The number of years? And so I think that sort of dehumanization process, it makes people have to shed their story of who they are, right? Like you come into court with your whole history of who you are, but that you have to leave it at the doorstep.
Absolutely.
MiAngel, for yourself as a lawyer, how hard is it for you to have to separate things yourself sometimes? Because obviously there's some cases that might be heartbreaking for you that don't work out in your favor. So how do you deal with that?
I don't separate myself well. I don't. I think that for me, to really be good at the work, it requires you to suffer. You have to be so close to your client's suffering that fighting for their freedom feels like fighting for your own. And, that has taken me a lot to get there, right? because you open yourself up a lot, right? You take a lot of punches standing up in court. But I don't separate myself. And when I see that happening, I know that I need to take a break and come back to it, because to fight for someone who's sentenced to life in prison, it requires all of you. I can't compartmentalize any part of myself.
Well, how does my angel decompress then? Because it's like you're taking in so many other people's trauma.
I travel. I hang out with my girls.
Okay.
I do stuff we won't talk about on the microphone.
Okay.
I do my thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that could be heavy, right?
Yeah, it's definitely heavy.
Because the language you use, you said, I suffer.
No, you do.
Ugh.
I mean, of course.
Yeah.
Because the person, your client is suffering, right? Their family is suffering. You know what it's like when you go into a prison, you got to get pat down. Somebody's treating you like you're not a human being. Like, all of that's trauma. And we can't, like, wax over that. You know, there's somebody who's looking at you and judging your family member. You can't touch them. You can't hug them. You know, you got a kid sitting in there, they're crying when it's time to leave. And that's the reality of it. People think that, you know, prison is just a cakewalk, and it's not.
That sounds very Christ-like in a way.
What?
Because it's like you're suffering for other people. You know, you're suffering because of your service to others. It's like you're giving of yourself. I don't know, it just seems very Christ-like to me.
Okay. I mean, I definitely, you know, I think I get a lot of joy in seeing families brought back together. I get a lot of joy out of that.
That's why this documentary, when I tell you, what made you decide to do it? Because we're following the story of, say, Edward Douglas, and we get to see how he actually gets released. And that was when you were talking to him on the phone, and he was trying to be cool and hold it together.
And then he fell apart.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So tell me what made you decide to actually do this documentary, because you've been doing this work for quite some time. I know you've worked with Kim Kardashian, and we'll talk about that in a minute also. But what made you decide to do this?
You know, I started recording my clients' stories and submitting them to President Obama and to the White House with clemency petitions, because it kind of felt like the paper wasn't enough. You know, they were getting a lot of paper, and I was like, you just can't really capture it. It needed visuals, right? And so I started just sending these CDs of just visual interviews of, you know, their family. And then that got picked up by this director, Nicole Jones, who was like, we can make a documentary out of this. And so I just was like, you know, I film when I tell my clients that they're coming home. I would film, you know, times along the way when I was upset. It's very open. I mean, you're open doing it, you know?
Yeah, no, it's great to see, because I think sometimes people can't even understand the severity of this until they get to actually see family members. They get to see the actual people who get released. They get to see the work that you're doing behind the scenes, because you don't get paid for this.
Right. No, I started my law firm with like $40,000 of my own money. Right. And like, you know, that's hard because I'm paying court fees for my clients because they can't afford it. And I think, you know, I always wanted to provide the best lawyering for people who couldn't afford it, because there's not enough of that, right? And so, you know, I was just like, I'm putting my own shingle out. Like, I'm doing it myself. I believe in, I can build a team of women, and we can do it. And so, yeah, it was an investment. You know, there was a time when I was like, I gotta either pay my mortgage, I gotta pay this court fee, you know. And so I think it's really, I love that it's grown and bloomed.
So who's helping you? How can people help you? I mean, because I'm just listening now, and if you do all this work pro bono, you're traveling, you have to get experts, you have to pay for court fees, you have to file. Like, there's a lot that deals with court. So who helps you? And how can people out there that's listening, like myself, and say, you know what, we can donate something to continue in your mission? Yeah,
absolutely. And so you could definitely donate at the www.decarcerationcollective.org. I would love that because we do have scholarships for children of incarcerated parents, and we offer reentry scholarships for people. So yeah, we've done some collaborations with some celebrities and influencers. Most recently,
Kim K, right?
Yeah, Kim K supported us, for sure, definitely.
Was it the 90 Days of Freedom campaign?
She did. I mean, we were doing the 90 Days of Freedom campaign, my co-counsel, Brittany Barnett and I, and that was a dare. We were just like, we're going to see how many people we can get free. Like, it was totally a dare, and it happened over text. And
Right.
so like halfway through it, she had heard about it through her, work with Brittany, and she just was like, I want to help you all, fund it, because we were literally traveling all over the country going into courtrooms.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so 90 days, we got 17 people sentenced to life in prison out.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, that was like no sleep. Charlamagne.
17 people with life?
17 with life in 90
Wow.
days. It was a dare.
So what do you say to people, because when she first came out and she was helping, people was like, oh, this is just for the TV, this is just for the cameras, she doesn't really care. So what do you see to those people? Because obviously she did.
Yeah, I say to those people that I think, credit, there were a lot of people who thought that we weren't getting credit for our work.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who we got out of prison and their families, that's who matters. Like I have never been confused about how the culture holds me.
Right.
I've always known that the culture appreciated it because they tell me all the time. So I got my flowers.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely think that she brought wider attention to issues, and I think that she's committed to the work. I also very much understand, though, why the culture was like, wait a minute, these are two Black women doing it. And I appreciate that because it was, it communicated to me that no matter what we're going through as a culture, we want to make sure that we feel held and seen, right? And so that was really dope. It also brought, going back to your question about, who else we're collaborating with. I got a call, this was in January, from Coach K.
Shout out to
And
Coach K.
he was just like, give me a number. I said a number, and within like an hour, that amount was in our bank account.
Wow.
And
Nice.
so, I just really appreciate, that's how I know, I know the culture is there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like for media attention or anything like that. It's literally to help us, get people out of prison. So,
Now you
yeah.
said you sent videos and things like that to President Barack Obama. Was he helpful in your fight, in your mission to get people out?
Yeah, so I'll give you some numbers.
And let us know, because I see Donald
Yeah.
Trump let people out as well. So we
Yeah.
want to know all the numbers. Tell
Okay,
us.
I'm gonna give you some numbers. So I was one of the first attorneys to submit a clemency petition to President Obama. When I started writing, everybody was like, it's never gonna happen. Clemencies are like, lightning striking or winning the lottery. And so I sent it in 2012. A year later, that one was granted. And it was one of the first 8 that he ever did. Then he created this clemency project, and by the end of his second term, 1,700 people had gotten commutations. 595 of those people were sentenced to life in prison.
Wow.
595.
Nice.
So that's Obama's stats.
Mm-hmm.
President Trump, I think he commuted maybe 20 or 30 people, maybe. I'm not sure on the exact numbers. 10 or 12 of those sentenced to life in prison. So, and I don't
So
disparage.
Barack did way more.
The numbers
I
speak
see,
for
yeah,
themselves.
Right. There's
And-
a lot of misinformation out there because Donald Trump will have you believe that he did all this work and Obama did nothing.
I think it's important for us to think about politics, though, right? Because, the First Step Act, which was passed in 2018, what had been written and proposed under Obama, right? But the Republicans wouldn't bring it to the floor to vote on because they didn't want him to have that win, right? It would have been an easy layup. It was
Right.
bipartisan support, but, Mitch McConnell didn't want to bring it to the floor to be voted on. And so then, 4 years later, it passes under a Republican president and, then they get the W. So, I see the politics.
What about Kamala Harris and Vice President Kamala Harris and President Joe Biden? Have they been open? I know it's only been 100 days, 100 and something days. Have they been open to the things that you've been doing?
I definitely think that there is an opportunity there to engage in some real bold action. I hope they will take it. They will have to.
Especially Joe Biden for his legacy.
It's for legacy, but also the morality of it. We are at the precipice. We cannot continue to pretend like it's not serious business right now. We're dying. And so
America's not a racist country, my angel.
America's absolutely a racist country. America's absolutely a racist country. Because if it wasn't a racist country, then the Biden administration wouldn't be opening these pattern and practice investigations, civil rights investigations in all these police departments around the country.
That's right.
Right. So they're investigating
The
it.
bills wouldn't be named after black people
Right.
who were murdered by the state.
Exactly. I mean, but I do think, what is required will have to be something more than reform. And I think about this Justice and Policing Act, and it'll pass probably, and people will think that there was a solution, but it doesn't do what people think it does.
Even with abolishing qualified immunity?
No, because qualified immunity is a judge-made concept, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can't legislatively abolish it. But specifically with regard to the no-knock warrants, right? All it does is says that for federal agents, they can't have no-knock warrants in drug cases, right? So you as a federal agent, you can go to the judge and ask for a no-knock warrant and just say, I think Charlamagne has guns, right? So that's your loophole. As the lawyer, I'm always thinking about what's the loophole they're going to use, right? And so, but we also know Breonna Taylor didn't die by a gunfire by a federal agent, right? It was local police. And what the Justice and Policing Act says is that if the local police department still uses no-knock warrants, then the feds may withhold funding. May, right? So, I mean, I think, it doesn't even say we absolutely will withhold funding. It says we may. And then it also says all of this will happen next year. And, I think that's reform, right? What you get is a maybe. And George Floyd isn't maybe dead.
Right.
They weren't maybe murdered.
That's right.
And so the solution can't be a maybe.
So what language needs to be in the bill to where police officers are held directly accountable? Because I always say that if I'm a police officer, when I'm interacting with people, the thing I should be thinking about is my pension and prisons. Either I'm going to prison or I'm going to lose my pension, or they're going to hit my pockets in some way, shape, or form. They're going to take money out of my bank account, whatever. I'm going to be held directly responsible for this individual's murder. So what language needs to be in there for that to happen? Right,
because taxpayers shouldn't be funding our own murders.
That's right.
Right. So the language needs to say that a cause of action can be brought against an individual police officer who commits a violation against an individual, and regardless of whether they're acting under color of law, right? Because that's the problem. They always say, well, I was, they hide behind the shield. I was acting under color of law. I was afraid for my life, or, I thought he had a gun. And that creates qualified immunity, right? It says as long as you're acting under color of law, then you have a shield and you can't be personally sued. And that's the problem, right? Like you could be personally sued in a car accident, And so I think that's the issue, and it has to be an absolute. It can't be a maybe.
I want to ask about the First Step Back, because people celebrate Trump for the First Step Back, but his administration also reinstated the war on drugs. So how much should the First Step Act really be celebrated?
I think the First Step Act was a small reformational step forward. I've certainly used it to get people out of prison, right? And so I will, always applaud anything that lets me pick more locks. However, I think it has some serious flaws, right? And so, it helps me get back into court in crack cases, but I got guys doing life for marijuana. Why are they still sitting there, right? And so I think that it gave us some inspiration, but it's not enough.
Yeah, what was Barack's bill? Was what, the Fair Restoration
Fair
Act?
Sentencing Act.
Fair Sentencing Act.
Right. And so the First Step Act just took pieces of the Fair Sentencing Act and made it retroactive. That's all. I mean, it's sort of like a bootstrap, which is, it's fine. We needed it to get people out of prison, but we still have mass incarceration. We still have people buried in prison.
And didn't Trump's administration roll back a lot of the stuff in the Fair Sentencing Act?
Well, I think that the way that they are prosecuting, so what you have is the policy on paper, and then what happens at the podium in the courtroom. And the way in which, people were being prosecuted was still disproportionately people of color. And the number of judges that were nominated were disproportionate. I think 85% of them were white men. And so, you still see the system the apparatus moving in a way that is racially unfair.
I was going to say, is there a way to make sure that the people in our community that were most affected by these laws in jail for marijuana can actually benefit now that it's legal and it's going to be $1 trillion business?
Yeah, I think that there will have to be expungement of prior marijuana convictions, right? Because a lot of times to enter into the industry, you can't have had a prior conviction, right? And so that leaves a lot of people out. They can't even access the door to get into the industry. So there needs to be some consideration of that because we've been disproportionately prosecuted for, marijuana offenses. I also think that education just about how the business works and how to set up and the tax implications and all of those things. We need to be able to access all of those resources. And so, I'm very hopeful. I think there needs to be set-asides for certain communities. So the dispensaries, I know this happened in Chicago, where dispensaries, would be prioritized in communities of color. That's really, really important.
I was going to ask, for people that are listening right now, can you give them the website again, and when can they see this documentary?
Yeah, so the website is www.decarcerationcollective.org, decarcerationcollective.org. The documentary is out now. It's on iTunes, it's on Google Play, it's on Vudu, so it's out. It's the third strike.
I got one more question, because since you are a wealth of knowledge on this stuff, what are some policies that target imprisoning Black and brown communities that we may not know exist that we should be aware of?
I think that, one is when you get out. So everybody's seen, people walking out of prison, right? But you're still on paper. And I think the policies of electronic surveillance and e-shackling, that is the revolving door. So you have all of these requirements or conditions for your release. Like you must get a GED, you must get a job, you must get drug testing. And some of those might just be insurmountable because you don't have the resources to get to the drug testing. You don't have yourself set up yet. And so I think the policy of placing people under surveillance, but not giving them the resources and able to successfully complete that is leading to more incarceration. Tomorrow I'm flying to Iowa because I have a federal court hearing in one of my cases there. Guy just walked him off a life sentence 60 days ago. He got a job, he got a car, he was living, had a family, and got rearrested because he stopped to get an oil change instead of going straight home after work. No crime.
Wow.
No crime, right? So I'm going to be standing up in front of a federal judge tomorrow, hoping that he doesn't go back into prison for getting an oil change.
Wow.
That is ridiculous.
Jesus Christ.
Wow, and he has receipts and everything, video camera that he
We
was at
file the
oil change.
receipts.
That's crazy.
We file the receipts.
What do you think's going to happen?
I think, I think he's probably going to have to be sent to a halfway house. He lost his job. He lost his job.
Wait, oil change?
He doesn't have his job anymore.
And if he didn't get an oil change, his car could have locked up on him. You know what I mean?
Right. Like how you getting to work?
How you going to get to work?
And how you going to comply with the condition of being gainfully employed? It's a cycle. And so, I use that as an example of how the deck is stacked, right? And, he can't go back to this particular town where they didn't, want him to be. And so that's how people end up in prison for getting an oil change.
MiAngel Cody, we appreciate you for joining us.
Thank you for having
Thank you so
me.
much.
No, thank you for coming.
And please
love to see you
and
again.
give us updates, of everything that's going on. Please,
this
absolutely.
was fun.
No, it's dope because even what you said about Kim K earlier, it's just like, this is what you're supposed to do. When you have a platform, you're supposed to shine light on folks like you. That's all I ask anybody to do. I hate seeing people on CNN or MSNBC talking about things like that they shouldn't be talking about. Just bring the experts on.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of people talking. I'm like, please don't. You're not helping. You're not helping. Nobody's getting out of prison with you talking.
Absolutely.
But we appreciate you so much, MiAngel, and thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you, Angela.
That's right. It's MiAngel Cody. It's the Breakfast Club. Good morning.